Welcome to a short edition of the No Stay Project. I had to do this, and I'm glad I did. You'll find out here soon enough why. I had to do a separate spotlight on tyranny for this guy, David Gates, who I mentioned on the last broadcast, and as reported to us by Jermaine. And he's a judge up there in Calgary, in Canada. And thank goodness I decided to do this, because as I was looking up, I found something, a little startling, but well, not startling, but very ironic, because it goes right to what we're talking about here. Now, for those who didn't hear the broadcast, Jermaine did report to us that when he was challenging the prosecution, the Crown prosecutor's claim that the Constitution and Code apply just because he's physically in Canada, the prosecution had no actual evidence and couldn't for over a year produce a shred of evidence because, hey, there isn't any. And this guy, David Gates, the Honorable, they give themselves those titles, the Honorable David Gates, actually told Jermaine that he doesn't need evidence and that the prosecution doesn't need evidence to support their claim. So he is on the Court of the Queen's Bench, and he does sit under the Associate Chief Justice, John Rook, who did the Meads versus Meads analysis. So yeah, he is up there at the Alberta court, the Calgary court there, the Court of the Queen's Bench. And very little about this particular tyrant. The only thing I could find is that he was the regional director for the Federal Department of Justice. And that's as far back as 2008. It's the only date that I can have, so I'll put that here in the video, that this is all I could find. So it looks like he was a prosecutor before he was a judge, but other than that, I really don't have any details about the guy's life. He has sat on some pretty high-profile cases, which brings me to this particular point, which is why I was so glad that I decided to do this separate video. He is quoted here, and this is from the star.com. Justice David Gates told jurors they can use as much or as little of the evidence as they want from 4 weeks of testimony, but not to resort to speculation. Speculation is guessing or making things up, said Gates in his lengthy instructions. Well, isn't that ironic? That the instructions he gives to the jury, he does not give to the Crown prosecution, which I guess he used to be a Crown prosecutor, so it's no surprise there. But when somebody says that the Constitution and Code apply because you're physically in Canada, and they don't have any evidence to back that up, that's what we call making things up. And yet this is exactly what Judge David Gates did to Jermaine. So, again, I'm glad I have it linked in the video in the show notes so that you can see that. Obviously, it's not something that he holds too dear. And this just goes to show that the rules, this idea of the rules applying evenly and all equal under the law and all the such platitudes and BS from these people, this is proof of that. We know that you're not supposed to speculate as a juror. We know you're not supposed to speculate as a party, whether you're a plaintiff or a defendant. You're not supposed to speculate. And yet, that didn't stop this man. And remember, most of the charges against Jermaine were thrown out. But it didn't stop him from allowing the prosecution to speculate or just make things up. It just so happens that what the prosecution was making up, David Gates seemed to agree with. So I guess it's okay to make things up as long as David Gates already agrees with you, because if you're a prosecutor, you are allowed to do that. But if you're a defendant or you're on the jury, apparently Mr. Gates has a problem with that. And again, and this is why I'm doing the spotlight on tyranny, so that people can see all we have of this man is this one picture, and that's enough. We have the picture, we know his name, we know where he works, and we know the crap that spews out of his mouth. That he can make a decision against Jermaine or anybody else, and the prosecutor doesn't need any evidence, and he doesn't need any evidence. So what he should have said to the jury was, while I, David Gates, and the prosecution may resort to speculation, you may not. Speculation is guessing or making things up. And only the judge and the prosecution had the privilege of doing that. And that is according to Mr. Gates himself. He said, I don't need evidence. So he can make decisions without evidence, and he can hold as true the prosecution's claims, and they don't need any evidence. So there you go. Our spotlight in tyranny this week, is on David Gates, Calgary judge. I don't need evidence. And again, if they had the evidence that the prosecution could support their claim that their sacred writ, their laws, apply to us just because we were physically in Canada, if they had the evidence, they would just present it. They would not speculate, they wouldn't make things up, and they wouldn't make such statements in open court as, I don't need evidence. Of course not. You have a prison system. But if you disagree with anything I've presented in this here video, please leave comments or join me on a live broadcast and show where I have gotten my analysis wrong, where I said something that was an error. Again, my name is Mark Stevens, the website markstevens.net.